So I'll be honest, I really struggled to come up with what I was going to talk about today, which is actually quite unusual because I've talked a lot before on to Scott and to on podcasts and in education about my own experience more generally and also very specifically. But today I knew I wanted to refer to my own experience and make it useful for others, but I just couldn't pull together what I wanted to talk about. And I think that's mainly because I've been really struggling with fatigue and I'm out of routine. And then today I realised that some of my observations during the last few weeks are what helped. And more so, actually, what's hindered was probably part of what I should actually talk about. I'm parking that for a moment. I'm going to come back to that and just talking more generally. Well, my opinion is that to some extent, the chickens come home to roost in perimenopause and menopause, in that it shows us what we've been doing that doesn't serve us. And I'm going to mix my metaphors now, but I'm going to continue on the bird theme. It's also the canary in their coal mine, where it's an early warning system of what shows us what's going to be a further problem in the future. And of course, none of this is fun to experience, but what if we view this in some ways as a good thing rather than solely a bad thing? And what if we pay attention to, we work to pay attention to, we work to understand, we work to know our own body, which obviously you've just already had people talk to you about exactly the benefits of doing that. And what if we notice without self-judgment what changes for the worse when we let things slip and what feels better when we improve things? And all health, but especially during perimenopause and menopause, when systems are already under pressure, changes over time, and all health gets harder to maintain as we age. And so in that way, it's a continual balancing act of life's demands. And we need to understand how to optimize our energy levels. And we also need to focus on consistency of positive action over perfection, which I feel like midlife women in particular really struggle with perfectionism. And obviously I mentioned the chickens and canaries and seeing all this as a positive, and I would encourage anyone, whether menopausal or not, to examine whether their body's giving them signs that things need to change and to make moves to improve this, even if it's just incrementally. And it probably does need to be incremental, and because time's going to pass and it's not going to get any easier the longer you leave it. And all we can do is try and be the best that we can be within whatever situation that we're in. And of course, I'm going to hold my hand up and say, just like everyone else, I struggle with all this. Like, chocolate's totally my kryptonite. And I'm going to outline a few other slip ups and less than perfects as I go through this call. And there is undeniably a hormonal aspect to many of our struggles in midlife. But I'm not going to say that HRT is a magic pill that solves everything and that every woman should be on it forever. What I will say is, if you could be doing everything right and you might still need some hormones replacing or optimizing, but taking HRT without also looking at lifestyle is, in my opinion, a terribly bad decision for all-round health, and you're making your whole life harder while making it less likely that you're going to get the best out of HRT, because basically lifestyle does matter. And I've lived with chronic fatigue since I was a teenager, and I've also got the added complication of having an immune condition that causes fatigue. And then, just to make things more fun, one of the things I struggle most with in perimenopause is low testosterone, which also affects energy levels even further, and at one point left me almost unable to function at all. And I've spoken many times before about my struggle to get testosterone, but what I haven't spoken publicly about is my current situation I find myself in, which is basically between a rock and a hard place, where I very dramatically a few months ago stopped getting on with progesterone. It suddenly made me completely suicidal, and to a lesser extent stopped getting on with estrogen as well. But I still feel like I need testosterone. I get really specific symptoms when my testosterone is low, and they go away when testosterone is given. And they're not just quality of life symptoms, they're ability to function symptoms. And the challenge for me is that the vast majority of menopause practitioners say there's only evidence or relevance that testosterone helps with sexual libido, not with wider energy levels, muscle and joint pain, brain power. And personally, I think this is incorrect. And some menopause practitioners agree, but others they just won't. And what I find immensely frustrating is that nowhere in this is the suggestion to treat me as an individual rather than adhere to blanket recommendations. I'm not going to massively go off on that tangent now because that's not what I decided to talk about. But what I will say is that I think it's really important that we recognise that people are individuals, and that while common principles apply, we should look at individual situations and accept there might be exceptions to rules. And it's what I try and do with my clients, because I think we should be flexible in seeking and finding solutions that work for individuals. And I feel like me going off on that little tangent is relevant to everything else I want to say this evening, but some of you might not. So if that was the case, just start listening again now. Because I've basically done what I normally do, where I've talked in kind of around the subject before I get to what I actually intended to talk about, which is the things that we as humans and as menopausal women can do via lifestyle to optimize our health, our well-being, and the menopause transition, which aren't about exogenous hormones, and how much some of the last few weeks have reminded me of some of that. So, as I said before, this is important for all-round health, and it's going to make any HRT work better. But it's also especially important for people who can't or don't want to take HRT, because some of this stuff might resolve symptoms. And also, the majority of the recommendations and things I'm going to cover in my observations, they're valid for anyone of any age and gender. They just become more impactful during menopause. And so back to my story right at the beginning I was going to tell. Basically, I've been all sorts of out of routine at the moment. So far this year, I've lived and worked in 4 different places in 3 different countries. And of course, this has had a massive impact on my routine, my consistency, my nutrition. And also, like everyone else, I've had like a few winter bugs. And while being out of routine and then doing my damnedest to get back into routine, or at least to optimize situations, while also dealing with this whole not taking HRT and testosterone issue, it's been a great illustrator of the things in lifestyle which can make both positive or negative differences. And I've kind of broken them up into groupings. So nutrition. Well, obviously, for everything to do with nutrition, I'm not going to be someone who doesn't try and remind people of long-term rather than short-term fixes. When I work with women on their nutrition, I'm always saying, let's look at the long-term, let's get out of fad thinking. It applies to body change, it applies to fat loss, it applies to weight management, and it also applies to when you're tired. And obviously, tiredness is a massive issue for menopause, but it's a massive issue for people just generally. And the recommendations are: don't reach for sugar and coffee as pick-me-ups, eat adequate protein, remember fibre and vitamins are important, eat real food, eat meals rather than continual snacking, and manage your food environment and stay away from trigger foods. And the reason for all this is because real whole foods are more satisfying, they're more satiating, they're better for blood sugar levels, and they help us stay full for longer. Also, there's been research that the higher the level of processed food in someone's diet, the more likelihood of menopause symptoms. There's also research showing that it affects mood and can help prevent or treat depression or anxiety with good diet. And other research has shown that processed food negatively affects hunger and satiety, meaning an average of 500 more calories a day are eaten. And this is just more general advice, but don't get suckered into all the fads, and I will include continuous glucose monitors in that. Instead, focus on appropriate portion size, sufficient protein, majority real whole foods in actual meals, and doing all that consistently over time. And I acknowledge that it's not easy in the UK food system to do this, but it can be loads easier than you think with a bit of planning, batch cooking, and not trying to be Jamie Oliver. Just find a few things that work and keep repeating them. And how I approach this for myself and for my clients for weight loss and for maintenance is focusing on portion size and understanding macros. So I think of things in terms of protein, carbs and fats content rather than thinking calories dieting. Calories are important, but protein is one of the most satiating macronutrients. So if you had a higher proportion of protein, you're going to less overeat. And of course, understand this will take time, and trying to get back to the body of a 25-year-old isn't realistic or good for mental health. And we as women, especially in midlife, have to recognize that that does psychologically, we've been kind of programmed by diet culture to judge ourselves in that way, and it's really hard. And when I've been feeling so rubbish the last few weeks, when I've been tired, when I've been out of routine, it's been so tempting to reach for crap. But I know the days I did that, I felt worse, not just on that day, but I also had lower energy and looked worse the next day too. And we know that nutrition can affect more than weight and long-term health. It can affect mood and performance. And it was just a really good reminder of the fact that so much about fatigue, so much about mood can be affected by what we eat, but it's so easy to slip into these bad habits about it. Likewise, hydration. Dehydration can impact cognitive performance and physical performance. It can cause things like brain fog and low energy. Well, they're menopause symptoms as well. And we're more dehydrated as we age anyway, so why would we make it worse? So constantly remembering to drink more water and have foods that contain water, it really helps, but it also means we're going to be less constipated. And when we're constipated, that means the waste is in our body for longer, which is also a real negative. But the issue is, if we don't move, we don't realise how dehydrated we are. And I fell into this trap as well, where I'd just be sat on my computer and I'd completely not realised that I needed to drink water until I started moving. Something else that was really interesting the last week or so, I don't normally drink, but I actually did last week. And over the course of 3 days, I had an entire bottle of wine. So I had 250 millilitres of wine, 1 glass of wine each day for 3 days. And each time I had it, I'd actually decanted it with fizzy water. So I'd had 500 ml of fizzy water. But I had a massive puffier face the next day. I also had worse sleep, and I just generally felt worse. Another really good reminder that it doesn't help, and it can give us a symptom that we think of as a menopause symptom. And it's why I ask my clients to go a couple of weeks without alcohol to notice these things, because it makes you realize that it's maybe only worth it on special occasions. But also, people worry about HRT and breast cancer in menopause, but the breast cancer risk of 2 or more units of alcohol a day is actually higher than the risk of taking HRT. A couple of other things I kind of dropped the ball on for a few days. Non-exercise movement, so that's walking around and stuff. It's hugely important for weight management and for energy levels. It's massively underrated in terms of its impact. I noticed I felt far more sluggish on the days I moved less. My hunger was greater, I slept worse, and I felt more stressed. And all of that is borne out by actual research. So basically, I fell into the trap of sitting at my computer all the time, and I felt awful afterwards. And the research actually backs up that that is what happens. Actual physical exercise. So I always recommend that people try and do cardio for heart health and resistance training for their bones and their muscles and their posture. Personally, I try and do, and I failed to do for a few weeks because of travel, 3 times a week, full body. It's also great for stress management, and there is evidence around it helping with hot flashes as well. I didn't do it, and what I noticed was I felt far worse. I felt more tired. My aches and pains in my muscles and my posture was worse. I felt more anxious as well. Again, it's another menopause symptom. Sleep. Well, night sweats can massively impact sleep. But remember, I just said you some evidence about how potentially exercise can help with that. Magnesium can help with sleep. But what we really have to bear in mind is things like revenge bedtime procrastination, which is basically where you're on your phone doom scrolling because you're just so knackered, but you don't want to go to bed because you feel like all you've done is work all day. I've been very guilty of that recently. I've been working till bedtime and then I just grab my phone and I'm a bit like, and it doesn't serve us. We're literally stealing our own sleep and energy. But also blue light. These are blue light blocking glasses. They go with me everywhere and I recommend them to everyone because it makes such a difference. This big light here and this big light here wouldn't be on if I wasn't doing this evening, because I try and make it a dimmer to make it a better environment for sleep, because we know these are sorts of things that people struggle with, especially during menopause. Now, I already said I noticed I slept worse when I moved less and I didn't exercise. I also woke up more in the night and I felt less rested, whereas normally I'd sleep through. And I also noticed that having one caffeinated coffee in the morning meant all of a sudden I was waking up at about 3 or 4 o'clock, whereas I don't with decaf. And I've also previously noticed that it's made things like PMT symptoms worse having caffeine as well. So obviously I knew all of those things, like eat better and move more and don't eat crap and all of that, just like you've all heard it a million times before. But the last few weeks have been like a really powerful reminder how much difference little things can make, both to general well-being and to things that really are considered menopause symptoms, such as disrupted sleep, energy levels, hunger, anxiety. And on the flip side, I bet there's loads of people who think those little things are too little to make a difference, who've never given them a chance and who, quite frankly, are feeling shit. So that's kind of where I'm going to leave it. I don't know if it made sense or not, but I'm going to leave it for you to reflect on, because I promise those little things really did make a difference to me. And they can to menopause symptoms and they can to everyone's health. I'm not going to say that just changing one or two little things is going to make everything all right, but changing all of this stuff does make a difference. And it does help our all-round health as well.